Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the What Can I Do podcast, book club edition, part of our education section, education department. We've been doing a deep dive into human rights and equality, liberty, moves, of course, into racism and oppression and colonialism. A wide-ranging topic, lots of tendrils, of course. And this particular series has been a group of essays and books on specifically the theme of equality and justice. Today we're going to be looking at Ella Baker. She was born in 1903. 1903. And she died in 1986, which obviously makes her 83. So just to place this, she was born right in between the Civil War and World War I. So she was a teenager in World War I. So she lived through World War I and the Depression and World War II and Korea and Vietnam and the Cold War, and she all the way until actually the year my first child was born. And so that would have put me at 26. Interesting. So 1903, she was 57 when I was born. So by the time I was born, she was already a grandma and had already experienced almost as much life as I have at this point right now. Right? She was born in Norfolk, Virginia, and she was raised in North Carolina and influenced by her mother's stories of resistance to slavery. No, not just her mother's grandmother, not just her grandmother's stories of slavery, but the stories of the resistance. And I think that's important. And then she graduated as a valedictorian from Shaw University in 1927. Nice. Very, very nice. So she was part of the NAACP. She was part of the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. She founded the SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. She mentored Diane Nash. She mentored Stokely Carmichael. She has a lot of connections. She was involved in the roots of the civil rights work. Grassroots organizing. In 1940, now mind you, 20 years before I was born, she joined the NAACP. National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, I want to say. I know that that's its purpose, even if I didn't get it exactly right. She moved to Atlanta in 1957 to help organize Martin Luther King Jr.'s SCLC, trying to build a broader movement base. So around the time when I was being born, these guys were getting together and doing something like what we've done by saying, oh, look at this. This is the problem. What can be some interesting solutions? And trying to come together as a group, kind of like Fanon was talking about in our last book club. Fanon was talking about needing to work all together. No, none of us are free till all of us are free. And we talked about the concept of, in order to overthrow a systemic situation of oppression, it would take all of us to do it. And if the ones who were the most successful joined in with the oppressors, it kind of killed it. Kind of ruined everything. Back to Ms. Baker, of course. She believed in group-centered leaders rather than leader-centered groups. Don't you love the flipping? Now that we've kind of identified flipping as a concept in the curriculum theory, I'm noticing it everywhere. So apparently she died on her 83rd birthday, and she was often referred to as the mother of the civil rights movement. What we have from her is a speech that she gave. It's called Bigger Than a Hamburger. Ella Baker, June 1960, the year I was born. And there's a little blurb before it. I'll read the blurb because it spells out some of what I was alluding to in the intro. Ella Baker played an instrumental role in the development of the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. Baker was born in Norfolk, Virginia, and grew up rural Littleton, North Carolina. After graduating from Shaw University, she organized consumer cooperatives in New York and worked on consumer affairs for the Works Progress Administration, WPA. In the 1940s, during World War II, Baker became a national field secretary of the NAACP, traveling throughout the country, organizing branches and developing membership drives. Increasingly, Baker became disaffected with the NAACP's leadership because decision-making occurred primarily in the national office rather than in the branch organizations. In 1957, Baker joined King to help found the SCLC. She directed the SCLC National Office and was instrumental in coordinating major civil disobedience actions. She became critical of the SCLC because of its emphasis on charismatic leadership. In 1960, Baker was the principal organizer in helping student protesters establish the SNCC. She solicited funds for SNCC and assisted in planning strategies for voter registration drives and desegregation campaigns. Baker eventually broke with the SCLC after she disagreed with ministers who felt that SNCC should simply be an arm of the SCLC rather than an independent organization. That is so confusing. It's less confusing when I see it. It feels more confusing to hear it. Although she preferred working behind the scenes to playing a public leadership role, she's widely regarded by scholars as one of the central leaders in the Black freedom movement. I wonder how many of those organizations that she complained about were organized by charismatic men, and if they liked keeping things under their control, and if that had anything to do with her feelings. So, quote her voice. Raleigh, North Carolina, the Student Leadership Conference made it crystal clear that current sit-ins and other demonstrations are concerned with something much bigger than a hamburger or even a giant-sized Coke. Note the reference to the lunch counter movement and pointing out that the civil rights movement isn't the lunch counter movement, that it's something much bigger and deeper. Whatever may be the difference in approach to their goal, the Negro and white students, North and South, are seeking to rid America of the scourge of racial segregation and discrimination, not only at lunch counters, but in every aspect of life. In reports, casual conversations, discussion groups, and speeches, the sense and the spirit of the following statement that appeared in the initial newsletter at Barber Scotia College, Concord, North Carolina, were re-echoed time and again. We want the world to know that we no longer accept the inferior position of second-class citizenship. We are willing to go to jail, be ridiculed, spat upon, and even suffer physical violence to obtain first-class citizenship. Give me liberty or give me death. By and large, this feeling that they have a destined date with freedom was not limited to a drive for personal freedom or even freedom for the Negro in the South. Repeatedly, it was emphasized that the movement was concerned with the moral implications of racial discrimination for the whole world and the human race. The only way to get rid of racism, seems to me, would be to be able to understand that we are a whole human race and that we all deserve the dignity, yes. By and large, this feeling that they have a destined date with freedom was not limited to a drive for personal freedom or even freedom for the Negro in the South. Repeatedly, it was emphasized that the movement was concerned with the moral implications of racial discrimination for the whole world and the human race. I did read that twice, but it was probably better the second time. This universality of approach was linked with the perceptive recognition that it is important to keep the movement democratic and to avoid struggles for personal leadership. It was further evident that desire for supportive cooperation from adult leaders in the adult community was also tempered by apprehension that adults might try to capture the student movement. The students showed willingness to be met on the basis of equality, but were intolerant of anything that smacked of manipulation and domination. This inclination toward group-centered leadership rather than toward a leader-centered group pattern of organization was refreshing indeed to those of the older group who bear the scars of the battle. The scars of the battle. Interesting, because this was before the 60s civil rights movement, I believe, or during, but I just wonder if she means this, the scar of the battle. There's been so many battles. The people who in 1960 would have been older people who'd already spent a lifetime fighting, the 80-year-olds, they were around at the Civil War time. When the Civil Rights Movement and Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X got going, the oldest people were born around the time of the Civil War. They carried direct trauma from parents and grandparents in their DNA. However, she goes on and defines that a slight bit differently. It was refreshing indeed to the older group who bear the scars of the battle, the frustrations and disillusionment that come when the prophetic leader turns out to have heavy feet of clay. Different battle, different scars, but it's really all part of the continuum, isn't it? The arc of history, the arc of the moral conscience. However hopeful might be the signs in the direction of group-centeredness, the fact that many schools and communities, especially in the South, have not provided adequate experience for young Negroes to assume initiative and think and act independently, accentuated the need for guarding the student movement against well-meaning but nevertheless unhealthy overprotectiveness. Here is an opportunity for adult and youth to work together and provide genuine leadership, the development of the individual to his highest potential for the benefit of the group. Many adults and youth characterize this Raleigh meeting as the greatest or most significant conference of our period. Whether it lives up to this high evaluation or not will in large measure be determined by the extent to which there is a more effective training in an understanding of nonviolent principles and practices and group dynamics, and in the redirection into creative channels of the normal frustrations and hostilities that result from second-class citizenship. I want you to understand the work that the result from second-class citizenship is doing. So I want to unpack that backwards and then read it again. That second-class citizenship results in these frustrations and hostilities, which are absolutely normal and need to be channeled into creative pursuits, and people need to be taught carefully group dynamics and nonviolent principles and practice. Because think about what Fanon said and what would be the natural thing that people might do if they're trying to overthrow this yoke of oppression. Violence. Inevitable. Perhaps inevitable, he says. So let me read that again, and then I've got a last thing to say, and then I will leave you with a thought. Whether it lives up to this high evaluation or not will in a large measure be determined by the extent to which there is more effective training in and understanding of nonviolent principles and practices in group dynamics, and in the redirection into creative channels of the normal frustrations and hostilities that result from second-class citizenship. Imagine if it were you. Imagine if it were you that some people, for no reason that makes sense to you, want you to be second class. Think about what that means on the airplane, the difference in first class and anyone else. And that you're being told that someone else has decided for you that your life, for all of it, you only get one, that you're relegated to coach. The point I wanted to make is from this sentence. Here is an opportunity for adult and youth to work together and provide genuine leadership. The development of the individual to his highest potential for the benefit of the group. And you know how I was talking about the connections between narcissism and racism and the cross, the tension at the cross. And this would be this: the development of yourself, the throwing off of the personal yoke of the racist as narcissist, or any other narcissist, but the individual racist is narcissist, throwing that yoke off for yourself, taking your independence in thought and action, and that this is part of what is needed and what is good to benefit the group. Going back to the idea of Fanon again, that the highest achieving members of the oppressed group mustn't attach themselves to the values and rewards of the dominant group, because that keeps all the rest of their people down. The closing the door after you walk through it concept, whether you're doing that on purpose or not. The thought that I want to leave you with. The thought that I want to leave you with. What right now are we being oppressed by? We being whatever group, whatever identity you're seeing yourself as part of. So it's your we. What's oppressing us as a group? How am I being held back specifically and personally? By whom? What can I do to free myself of their yoke? And how will that free me up to help my group? See if you can apply that to any group that you're a part of. This is the What Can I Do podcast, today in service of the Rural Launch Foundation and Juku Education Department. Thank you for listening.